There we go. So today I want to talk a little bit about marriage and how we can make it a little less risky. But I want to start by reading you something that I ran across. This is a fellow, and he's writing to computer company, tech support. So he writes, last year I upgraded from girlfriend 7.0 to wife 1.0. I soon noticed that the new program began unexpected child processing that took up a lot of space and valuable resources. In addition, wife 1.0 installed itself into all other programs and now monitors all other system activity. Applications such as Poker Nights 10.3, Football 5.0, Hunting and Fishing 7.5, and Racing 3.6. I can't seem to keep wife 1.0 in the background while attempting to run my favorite applications. I'm thinking about going back to girlfriend 7.0, but the uninstall doesn't work on wife 1.0. Please help. Thanks, troubled user. So here's the reply. Dear troubled user, this is a very common problem that men complain about. Many people upgrade from girlfriend 7.0 to wife 1.0 thinking that it's just a utilities and entertainment program. Wife 1.0 is an operating system. It is designed by its creator to run everything. It is also impossible to delete wife 1.0 and to return to girlfriend 7.0. It is impossible to uninstall or purge the program files from the system once installed. You cannot go back to girlfriend 7.0 because wife 1.0 or 1.0 is designed to not allow this. Look in your wife 1.0 manual under warnings, alimony/child support. I recommend that you keep wife 1.0 and work on improving the situation. I suggest installing the background application Yes Dear to alleviate software augmentation. The best course of action is to enter the command C:\apologize. Because ultimately you will have to give the apologize command before the system will return to normal anyway. Wife 1.0 is a great program, but it tends to be very high maintenance. Wife 1.0 comes with several support programs, such as Clean and Sweep 3.0, Cook It 1.5, and Do Bills 4.2. However, be very careful how you use these programs. Improper use will cause the system to launch the program Nag 9.5. Once this happens, the only way to restore the program Wife 1.0 is to purchase additional software. I recommend Flowers 2.1 and Diamonds 5.0. Warning, warning, do not, under any circumstances, install Secretary with Short Skirt 3.3. This application is not supported by Wife 1.0 and will cause irreversible damage to the operating system. Best of luck, tech support. So there you have it. So marriage in our culture is a huge gamble, let's face it. There's all kinds of marriages that are failing all around us. And so there is good reason to be a little bit apprehensive about getting into marriage. And there are a lot of people that are apprehensive about marriage. I just remembered. We have a little notebook for you if you want to take notes today, and there are a few things that I will suggest you write down. So if you haven't got one of these notebooks and would like one, just raise your hands right now and we'll get one to you. Okay? And the other thing is today there's a little handout as well called Weekly Marriage Maintenance Plan. So if you are married, take this home, and I encourage you to take some of the steps. You might not be able to do all of it all at once, but you could start with one thing and then move on from there. And I guarantee you it will help your marriage do better. So today we want to look at some of the ways that we can actually help lower the risk of marriage failure. And there's some things that I'm going to suggest, but ultimately where I want you to go with this is to have some good conversations with your spouse about this. And if you're not married yet, this is good stuff for you to just remember for helping other people who might be struggling in their marriage. Or if you end up getting married yourself at some point, this could be helpful for you as well. But it's really good common sense stuff, but ultimately it can easily slip by the wayside if we're not careful. So I want to start by looking at God's original plan for husbands and wives. So we're going to go back to the book of Genesis. That's the very first book in the Bible. Now, I just want to say this. We refer to the Bible because we believe this is the most important and reliable document in all of history. And there's lots and lots of scientific reasons for that. But you need to understand that Genesis was written several hundreds of years after the things that it's documenting, if you will. And it's not written to be a science textbook. It's written for us to understand God's thinking behind what He did when He created mankind. So that's what we want to focus on today. So don't get hung up on other details and things like that. Well, this doesn't agree with science. Whatever. Let's just put that all aside right now. What we want to do here is understand why God created us the way He did. So we're going to look at two different passages from Genesis. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 to 31. And there it says, "Then God said, 'Let us make human beings in our image, to be like us. They will reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the livestock, all the wild animals on the earth, the small animals that scurry along the ground.' So God created human beings in His own image. In the image of God He created them. Male and female He created them. Then God blessed them and said, 'Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, all the animals that scurry along the ground.' Then God said, 'Look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the earth and all the fruit trees for your food. And I've given every green plant as food for all the wild animals, the birds in the sky, and the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life.' And that is what happened. Then God looked over all He had made. He saw that it was very good." Okay, so notice two things about this passage. First of all, God created mankind, or humans, in His image. Both male and female were created in His image. So men and women obviously are different, so they portray, or their image of God is a little bit different, or they're shining different parts of God in the way that they were created. And when mankind fell into sin, that got distorted, and the image that we were portraying of God got somewhat blurred. And that's exactly why Jesus came later. Several thousand years later, Jesus came to earth, who was God in human form, and He came with the specific purpose of changing that image back to reflecting God more accurately, to basically refocus the camera, if you will, so the blur goes and we could see in each other more clearly the image of God. And this is why it's so important for us to invite Jesus into our lives. See, when Jesus comes into your life, he actually begins to change the way you see life and the way you see other people. And when you see other people through the lenses of Jesus, you begin to see the image of God in a whole new way. This is the beauty of following Jesus. And if you've never invited Jesus into your life, you are missing out. A whole perspective of life that really is transformative. So I encourage you, if you've not started that kind of a relationship with Jesus, please do that. And if I can help you, let me know. Or if you know somebody else that's a follower of Jesus, ask them to help you. But don't miss out on this opportunity, because it is profoundly life-changing. It changes literally everything about the way you see life. Now, the second thing I want to point out from this passage that we've just read is notice how God created humans to have authority over or rulership over creation. So there is a hierarchy here. He put mankind in charge of the rest of his creation. Now, that's not giving mankind permission to abuse creation, to do whatever they want with creation. It's only saying that mankind is in charge or responsible of caring for creation. Now, this works really well when we as humans take that responsibility wisely and do our part to help creation flourish. However, it's also possible, and I believe this happens, where people actually get their role reversal happening here and begin to view creation as more important than humans. And we get our priorities out of whack, and things don't work well when you put things out of the way God created them to function. So I just want to kind of draw your attention to that idea right up front. So we're not given permission to destroy what God created, but we're not, on the other hand, called to put what God created as a higher priority than our relationships with other humans and what is important for humans as well. Okay, now I want to go to the second chapter of Genesis, which is a more detailed version or look at how God created humans in particular. So I want to go to verse 18 and start there. So this is the next chapter, starting in verse 18. Then the Lord God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I will make him a helper who is just right for him." So the Lord God formed from the ground all the wild animals and all the birds of the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would call them, and the man chose a name for each of them. He gave names to all the livestock, all the birds of the sky, and all the wild animals, but still there was no helper just right for him. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. While the man slept, the Lord God took out one of the man's ribs and closed up the opening. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib, and he brought her to the man. "At last," the man exclaimed, "this one is bone of my bone and flesh from my flesh. She will be called woman because she was taken from man." This explains why a man leaves his father and mother and is joined to his wife, and the two are united into one. Now the man and his wife were both naked, and they felt no shame. So here now we see that God made man, the male, out of the dust of the earth, and he made all of the rest of creation that way as well. And then after he had made man that way, then he decides, okay, we're going to now make woman, and he made the woman a little bit differently in that he did surgery. So God was the actual very first surgeon on earth, and he did surgery on the side of man, took a rib out of him, and then created the woman out of the man. Now you've heard this, probably heard this before. Maybe some of you artists know this. There's always a rough draft before the masterpiece, right? So that's what was going on here. Man was the rough draft, woman was the masterpiece. And then you see here that God says the reason he made woman was to be a helper for man. Now, I want to explain a little bit about this word helper, because I think there's been a lot of misunderstanding about that. So the original language that the Old Testament, which Genesis is part of, was written in, is Hebrew. Hebrew is what Jews speak. And the word for helper there is the word Ezer. Ezer occurs in the Old Testament 21 times. Now, the word helper in our language, in English, often is seen as sort of a subordinate role. You know, you think of a boss who has a helper who works for him. You know, or like a welder has a welder's helper who works for them. It's more kind of like a hierarchical idea. But see, in the Hebrew language, this word Ezer it occurs 21 times in the Bible. Out of those 21 times, 16 of those actually refer to God. God is our Ezer. So God is our helper. And you'll see sometimes in the Bible, you'll see that God is referred to as our helper. 3 out of those 21 times, Ezer refers to another man. So the man is the helper for the man. And then in these 2 times are the only 2 times in the Bible that it refers to a woman. A woman as the helper. Now, I want to help you understand here that we, in our English language, have a bias towards seeing a helper as less than. I don't see God as less than me. Do you? Like, is God your little helper that you tell him what to do? That's not the way I see it. And yet, we can easily take it in these 2 instances as if God is creating a little sidekick for the man, even though this is the only time it refers to woman as a helper. And it refers to her as a helper in the same way as God is our helper. This word, helper, actually literally means to surround and protect or aid. So when we say that God is our helper, he is saying, I will surround you, I will protect you, I will aid you. And when God created woman to be our helper, to be man's helper, he created her to surround him, to protect him, and to aid him. So when men have thought of their wives as helpers, as somebody that they get to boss around, or somebody that they are in leadership over in some way, shape, or form, we have misunderstood what God intended by them being our helper. God never created woman to be dominated by or ruled over by men, by their husbands. He created women to be helpers in the sense that they are protectors. They are there to surround their husbands. They are there to aid their husbands. Now, God doesn't give us a clear instruction about exactly what that ends up looking like in each particular situation. I believe the reason God didn't do that is because He actually wants men and women as husband and wife to work together as a team where they're helping each other in different ways. And that can look differently for different couples. Different couples have different strengths and weaknesses that they can help each other with. And this is exactly, I believe, what God intended for them to have each other's backs. And that needs to be negotiated, talked about, shared in different ways. That's exactly what I'm encouraging every couple to do. To figure out, through talking to each other, how to have each other's backs. How to help each other. Now, I've got a few suggestions here, just to kind of stimulate some conversation between the two of you. I'm not saying that this is what God says. I'm just saying these are some ideas that can help you as be a launch pad to your conversations. So, first of all, men and women bring different strengths. So let's just talk about this for a second. Men, the average man, let me read it to you just so that the average man has 50% more brute physical strength than the average woman. So 40% of a man's body weight is muscle. 23% of a woman's body weight is muscle. That's average. So, my suggestion is that one of the ways in which men can help women is with tasks that require physical strength. I think that would be a good use of his strengths to help her. Now, this is not always true. I don't know if you guys caught this in the news the other day, but there was a mugger who went to attack a woman. It turns out that she was a UFC fighter. He did not fare well. He came out of that in a very bad shape. So it's not always true that men are physically stronger than a particular woman, but on average, that is the case. So that might be something you could look at. Men, you can help your wives by being there for them in physically demanding situations. Now, on the other hand, women, typically, the average woman is far stronger relationally and in communication skills than what the average man is. And so, maybe this is a way that women can help their husbands through helping them in relational situations with communication. And so, women can lead the way in social situations and in communication, maybe even in conflict resolution. Here's a fact from a professor named Dr. John Gottman. It's a biological fact that men are more easily overwhelmed by marital conflict than are their wives, and it takes a greater physical toll on men. And he says, it's no surprise that men are more likely than women to attempt to avoid conflict. We talked about conflict last week, because it actually physically is harder on men to be engaged in a conflict resolution with their wives than what it is for women. So they've done all these studies, and men's heart rates go up quicker. And once your heart rate is above 120 beats per minute, your brain starts to shut down and you can't think straight. This happens way more quickly for men than it does for women in conflict situations. So men, you are at a huge disadvantage when it comes to resolving conflict with your wives. So here is one thing that you wives can really be helpful with. If you remember, like your husband is physically stronger than you, but you are emotionally way stronger than your husband. Now, he's not going to tell you that. We don't let on that we're weak. The reason we don't let on that we're weak is because we're too weak to let on that we're weak. But ladies, here is an area where you can surround and protect and aid your husbands. You need to be extremely gentle and careful with your husband when a conflict situation comes up. And I know that sounds frustrating. He's a grown man. He should be able to handle himself. Yeah, I wish we could. But just put the shoe on the other foot. If he treated you that way when it came to lifting heavy stuff, you're a grown woman, you should be able to lift that. That wouldn't be fair. And it's exactly the same way with women expecting their husbands to be able to be strong and confident in conflict situations, especially within marriage. So women, you can be a really great helper to your husband by being profoundly sensitive and gentle with him when conflict is brewing in your relationship. Okay, I'm going to just run through a few things quickly that are from a research project that was done in the States. This was done by, I got this from a fellow named Jimmy Evans, who has a ministry together with his wife Karen called Marriage Today. And he gives 4 things that wives can do and husbands can do to help. But this is based on American research. So it may not apply to Canadians, but we'll just use it as a jumping off point again for conversation. So the first thing that women say that their husbands could help with is protection. Now, I don't know whether that would be exactly the same here in Canada or not. There's a lot of places in the States that are pretty dangerous, and so women want their husbands to be protecting them in those situations. Canada, at least we believe, is safer. Anyway, the second thing that women are saying that they would like from their husbands is non-sexual touch. So that's like hugs, kisses, holding hands, things like that. So guys, we can do this. We can do this for our ladies. We can hold their hands, we can hug them, we can be physically, put your arm around her. These are things that we can do that they really appreciate. Now, not all women are the same, so just talk about it and see if your particular wife would like this. Now, here's the third one. Open and honest communication. So American women are saying they want their husbands to do this. Now, this is hard for us ladies, but guys, this is something that we can do for our wives. Try our best. We learn. And ladies, I'm going to just reiterate, be patient with us. This is not easy for us. So we will learn, we will grow, but just help us by not putting too much pressure on. The fourth thing that American wives are saying that they would like to see from their husbands is leadership. Now, 2 particular areas. Financial leadership. Some men are good at this and some men are not. But it's something that American women are saying. The second thing is spiritual leadership. Now, here again is an area where women often are stronger than their husbands in this whole spiritual area. But it varies, and it's something that you should have a conversation about in your marriage. If it's something that you as a wife really desire, be honest with your husband and then be patient with him as he tries to grow into that. And I suggest taking baby steps and talking about specific steps that he can take to move in that direction, if this is important to you. It's not to all wives, but to some it is. Now, these are the 4 things that husbands in the States said were important to them. Number 1, respect. So this comes back to this whole sense of emotional fragility that often men experience. So they need to be handled with care and respect and gentleness. It seems even more so than women do, especially verbally. So, ladies, you can do that. If this is important to your husband, he may not ask for it. He may not even be courageous enough to say it outright, but I don't think you'll go far wrong by being very respectful and gentle with your husband. The second thing, and this probably won't surprise any of you, is sex. American men say that sex is very important to them. Now, I don't know what Canadian men would say, but I would be highly surprised if it's not pretty important to men in Canada too. Harry's convinced of that for sure. Now, God actually talks about this. If you want to read more about this, go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. And Paul is writing there, and he says that, you know what, sex is not something that should just be kind of shoved off to the back burner. He says this is a very, very important area that you need to prioritize in your relationship. Now, typically, women don't see it as nearly as high a priority as what men do, but ladies, you can do this. You can do this for your man. And it's interesting that God actually says in 1 Corinthians 7 that the ownership of your body in a sexual way actually goes both ways. He says men have ownership of their wives' bodies, wives have ownership of their husbands' bodies, and it's not always the case that the husband wants it more than the wife does. Sometimes it's exactly reversed. But in every case, I believe it's something that God created to be a high priority in marriage. And men feel that sense typically more than women do. But this is something I think both men and women in marriage need to take seriously and do for each other, as this is a way to help build a strong marriage. Okay. Third area that men in the States say is important to them is shared activities. So here's the deal, ladies. Guys like to do stuff together with you. Like they like to do stuff together with anybody, but especially with you. That's why, and let me say this, that's not always the case. Some guys are loners, but a lot of guys enjoy doing stuff together. They go hunting together, they go to games together, they do, all kinds of fun things together. But I can almost guarantee you, in many, many cases, the most favorite person they have to do stuff together with is actually their wife. Now, the interesting thing is that a lot of girlfriends get this. And so when they're dating, they will do stuff with their boyfriends that they didn't normally do. They'll go to games, they'll go hunting, they'll do this, that, and the other thing just to be together. And then I don't know what happens, but once they get married and have kids, it's like they forget. And that's something that guys really would appreciate if you'd remember. And doing stuff together just to be together as you're doing it. Now, for ladies, your motivation to do it might be because you want to connect with him. He's connecting with you too, but he's actually interested in the thing too. So remember that, like when you're at the game or you're hunting, it's not just so that you can talk to each other, because that might be a little irritating, especially if you're hunting. But just being present with them can be very, very profound. It's profound for him, at least. Now, the last thing that American guys say, and I don't know if this would be the same in Canada or not, but they say domestic help is really important to them. And what they mean by that is cooking and cleaning and looking after the home. Now, you've probably heard the saying, the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Have you ever heard that saying? So ladies, if you know how to cook, man, you have got a real huge strength that will endear you to your husband, probably in a very profound way. And so this is an area where you can be a help to him. And this is, traditional, but a lot of guys really appreciate it. Now, there are guys that are great cooks and love cooking, and this would not necessarily be a thing for them, but a lot of guys do really appreciate it. Anyway, my whole goal here is to just create some areas where you can talk, because every couple is unique. Talk about this. See what your spouse in particular would like, and see what the honest conversations you have will bring to the surface. The other thing I just want to point out here is sometimes couples have these conversations early on in their marriage, and then they never talk about them again. And then they just assume that it's always going to be the exact same thing. And so they have what she does and what he does, and they just stick to those roles. The fact of the matter is, those things can change. As life progresses, things can change. When the kids are small, she might actually appreciate some help with cleaning or around the house kind of thing. And then once the kids are off to school, maybe it'll change, and there'll be other things that would be more important to her. So I think it's important to have these kinds of conversations on every few years, maybe even every few months. One of you gets sick and needs a new kind of help. And so having conversations about what would be really helpful right now, I think is very important for the strength of your marriage. And I believe that's exactly the way God created our marriages to work. Here's the thing. God did not mandate who should do what in marriage. I know there are some Bible teachers that teach that. I'm not one of those. I do not believe that there's blue jobs and pink jobs. I believe that God created us to help each other, to have each other's backs, and to walk in a way that is honoring to God in our attitude. So God did not mandate who does what, but He did mandate humility. That is non-negotiable. God created us to be humble towards one another in the way that we relate to each other. That is profoundly important. So, humility is the key thing that makes marriages less risky. So for those of you that are not married and would like to be someday, here's my advice to you. If you want to have a low risk of your marriage failing, be humble and look for somebody humble to marry. That's, if I was going to simplify it down to this very simplest form, that would be the key thing to look for. Now, here's the deceptive part. Anybody can be humble for a while if they really want you to marry them. Anybody can act really kind and gentle and loving and caring and good to you for a while if there's a chance that they will get something out of it, which is a ring on your finger. So don't let yourself be fooled by the way they're acting when you're dating. Only. And a lot of people make this mistake. And let's face it, it's easy to be humble when you're in love. When you're madly in love with another person, that comes pretty natural. What you need to look at is, what were they like before they met you? And what do they treat people like that they're not madly in love with? Because the truth is, that's likely how they're going to end up treating you in the long run. So how do they get along with other people? How humble are they in the way they relate to other people? That would be a key criteria for you to look at to lower the risk of your marriage failing later on. I'm going to take this actually even a step further. We tend to become like our parents. As much as we want to deny that and we want to say, forget it, I'm nothing like my parents. The older I get, the more I realize I am like my parents. And so not only do you want to look at how that person in particular treated their spouse or treated the people around them, look at the family they came from. Is the family good to people? Are they humble people? And I'm not in any way here minimizing the transforming power of Jesus, because Jesus can take people and transform their hearts and make them humble. And that is the most important thing to look for, is Jesus transforming that person. But there's also a sense in which we are we're influenced profoundly by our families. And when our families are really mean, it takes a lot of transformation to become really humble. And so to lower the risk, look at the track record from the previous generation as well. See, the truth is, nobody is as good to people as what God is. And so when we hang out with God, we become like Him. So that is the key thing. We need to be with Him. You could come from a great family, but if you walked away from God, you're headed in the wrong direction in all kinds of different ways. But if you come from a bad family, but you're walking with Jesus, you're headed in the right direction. The best possible scenario is to come from a good family and walk with Jesus and build on that what you have inherited from your family. So I ran across this little story. There's two fishermen. Now some of you that are from cultures where there's a lot of fishing, whether it's Newfoundland or other cultures, you get this. So the two fishermen, they were commercial fishermen, they fished with nets. They had two different ways of dealing with their nets. One of them, every time he hauled in his catch, he would just empty the fish out of his nets and then dump them in the back of the boat, and next time he headed out, he dumps them over. His philosophy was, the ocean will take care of all the debris or whatever, and all I'm interested in is the fish. The other fisher, he would be a little more meticulous and take the time every time he hauled his nets in with all the fish, not only to take all the fish out and process the fish, but then he would go through the nets and clean out all of the debris, all of the seaweed and all kinds of stuff that gets stuck in the nets. So the nets were perfectly clean every time he threw them overboard to fish next time. The fisherman that didn't clean his nets gradually got more and more clogged up, and he started catching less and less fish, until finally, out of frustration, he was ready to just give up on this fishing business altogether because he wasn't catching anything. And he just cut his nets loose, threw them overboard, and quit. The other fisherman, he kept catching fish and catching fish and catching fish and did well. Unfortunately, that's the way it is with the way some people do marriage. See, when we allow all kinds of stuff to gather in our marriages that goes untalked about, that needs that we have that we never communicate, things that we could help each other with but never bother to ask or never bother to do, it clogs up the nets. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, our marriages get less and less healthy and less effective until finally people give up. But when we have conversations on a regular basis about how we can help one another, I believe that's like that fisherman that's cleaning the nets. It maintains a healthy, helpful relationship between the two spouses. So my challenge to you today, if you're married or in a significant relationship with someone, is to have a good, honest conversation about what they can do to help you thrive. Now, don't overwhelm each other. If you haven't had a conversation like this for a long time, don't list off 15 things that you need them to do immediately or you're walking out the door. Don't do that. But maybe think of what would be the most important thing right at this moment in time, at this point in your marriage, that would help you to thrive a little bit more. And then make a commitment to work on that one thing. Can you do that? Can you make that commitment to do one thing that would help your spouse, would azer your spouse to thrive in their relationship with you? And if you're not married, then I just want you to think about this in a way that would be helpful for people around you. And if you're thinking of getting married someday, just remember that's something that is profoundly important. So I'd like you to just think about that one thing right now. What's one commitment? Maybe the commitment is, I'm going to have this honest conversation. Maybe you've already had the conversation and you just forgot or it's slipped by the wayside. Whatever that is, I want you to bring it back to the forefront of your memory and recommit to that today. This is the one thing I'm going to do. So, but Pastor Michelle is going to just play quietly, and I'm going to invite all of us to think through, and I'll ask God to bring that to light about what it is that's that one thing that you could do to help. Okay? Can we do that? And then she'll close in a minute.